planned to do something, that didn't mean he was going to do it. And so we, because by the next day he may radically change his mind. And so we learned over a long period of time to distinguish between plans that are going to be carried out and plans that are just, sitting around, why I ought to do such and such.
He thought he was on a mission from God, didn't he?
He really did. He thought that God wanted him to rule the world, and he was very confused as to why other people didn't see that. And so when he killed off people, personally or through his troops or whatever, basically what he was doing in his mind was he was clearing the way for God's purpose. And, he was always really confused about why he was such a good guy and nobody could understand that.
Didn't you share with me that he had plans to run the world and to somehow launch some type of nuclear so that he was in control of the Arab world? Talk about that.
Well, there was one session that I did where there is a thing called a Phase 7 where I won't go into the explanation of it, but anyway, the information that came up was, you're not going to believe what comes next. And that came up right in the middle of my session. So I went on, I wrote it down. You have to report everything. And what came next, I could not believe that he had stolen a missile, a U.S. missile, was going to lob it into Mecca on during the Feast of Ramadan and kill off all of the people going to the Hajj and also all of the other Arab leaders, leaving him as the leader of the Muslim world to bring a holy jihad against the non-Muslim world. The fact is, and this wasn't really told to the U.S. or anybody else, but at that time he could have won. And I passed that session on up to my director, and he said, I don't believe any Arab would do this, but maybe I'd better pass it on up just in case. And it went on all the way up the chain of command, and sure enough, they investigated, and he had an American missile pointed right at Mecca, and waiting for the Feast of Ramadan. And the fact is that if it hadn't been for that one session, I'm fairly well convinced that right now either you and I would be Muslim or dead, and those would be our only two choices.
Why?
Because they would have won.
From one missile?
Oh, no, from the war. From the war that resulted.
Oh, okay.
That one missile would have started a war between the Muslims and the non-Muslims, and at that time, especially, the Muslims would have won.
You also did work inside the Lockerbie explosion in the sky when the plane went down with David Morehouse, didn't you?
Yeah, that was a particularly hard one, yeah.
Can you share something about that?
Well, the people on the plane, were dead. And basically it was one of those that was such a surprise that they had no idea what was going on, and their spirits were basically wandering back and forth around the plane trying to figure out what happened and so forth. And so Dave Morehouse and I, and I think it was Mel Riley, went in and just sort of explained and got them started on their way to an afterlife. But it was a particularly bad thing. What we were looking for was the cause of the explosion. And I think it was Dave Morehouse that found the actual cause of the explosion. And when the investigators on the site opened or found the remnants of the suitcase, they figured that Dave, it proved that Dave was right. He got his feedback on that.
But didn't that explode in the air? Did all these people die like in the air or not till they hit the ground?
No, it exploded in the air, and most of them died in the air, but a few rode the plane all the way down to the ground and were just in horror, and actually died when the plane hit.
God, how terrible. That must have been a terrible one to view.
Oh, it was. We have viewed some pretty terrible things. When I have students here, I try to impress on them that this is not a toy. This is the real thing, and that you want to be very careful what you are given to view, because, humanity is not a nice race. They can do some awfully inhumane things to other humans and animals and so forth. And so you have to be very trustful that the person who's tasking you is not going to task you with some of these things before you're trained and ready to receive them.
I would think that would be essential to have the stewardship be clean and pure.
Absolutely. And I don't know how many times I have seen psychic groups, well-meaning and often very talented, who will get together and there will be a headline of some missing child, and they'll get together and decide, try to psychically find out what happened to the child and all this. And it takes many of the better psychics through the experience of getting molested, murdered, dismembered, spread across acres of land and so on. And once they have that experience, they may, over time, get away from the emotion of it, but they never get away from the memory. And I think the well-meaning projects that many psychic groups have has ruined more psychics than probably anything else. You have to be trained to go through these things. What if you took a fledgling cop his first day on the force and took him to the worst, most gross murder? You'd lose a cop.
Absolutely.
Well, it's the same thing with the psychic.
The book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
Yeah, Betty Edwards.
Betty Edwards has this book that's been out a long time that has really helped prepare and be part of the training of remote viewing, one part of it, the ideogram. Can you talk about her, the book, and how it relates to the ideogram in the sessions?
Yeah, she is an artist, and she wrote a book on drawing, how to draw on the right side of the brain, and that is using your subconscious mind as the sort of as the eye that you're going to view a picture with, so that you can draw it more accurately, and so that you can draw it with feeling and with the intuitiveness that an artist really needs to have. And this book actually teaches you physical moves and physical ways to get in touch with your own subconscious mind. As a result, that became the only mandatory reading that we had in the military unit. Everybody who came in had to go through the book and go through the workbook and do all of the exercises and everything. And it's amazing how working through that book and learning how to draw pictures, you set up a line of communications with your own subconscious mind. You become more creative, you become more intuitive. And listen, that book I would recommend to anyone and everyone. It is a fantastic book. And, the fact that it sets up that line of communications between your conscious and subconscious mind, that was not lost on us, because that's what we were training people to do.
That's great. And this has been around a long time. Isn't that funny how a book can be around for a long time? It could be seminal, critical to a certain group, and then all of a sudden you find out it's way more important than anybody ever knew.
Oh, yeah.
And that it's something that should be almost like required reading. It's that profound and that helpful.
It is. It is a totally profound book. And, along that line, simple things. We would, whenever a person did something completely right, followed the protocols completely right and all that, we had a reward system that was just amazingly effective.